Happy Wax on Wednesdays. Today I'm going to answer some questions that I get asked pretty often, and that is about fusing. What is it? Why do I have to do it? And how do I get the layers flat? So I'm going to show you the very beginnings of a painting today. And this is just a 12 by 12 cradle board. I have one layer of encaustic gesso down on the board that has dried. And now I can begin to go ahead and add the encaustic medium. And in this case, I've added white to my encaustic medium to make a white encaustic paint. Okay, so for this first layer, you can see all of the brush strokes and drips and drops that are in here in the painting, and that's okay because the first step that we need to take in combining all the layers together and bonding them to our substrate is fusing. And fusing in encaustic means to bond each layer of encaustic wax with the previous layer below it and to your base substrate. So every subsequent layer that you add of encaustic medium or paint, you're going to fuse to the previous layer. So in this first layer of the painting, it doesn't matter if we have brush strokes and drips and drops, because all of that is going to be melted away into a nice smooth surface. And for this, you can either use a heat gun or a torch. In this case, I'm going to use the Iwatani torch. It's an Iwatani torch head on a butane canister, and it has an adjustable fuse. Okay, so by fusing the first layer, I'm remelting the wax completely, so it's nice and smooth. There's no getting out the air bubbles, as well as any brush strokes and drips that I put on in adding that first layer. And I basically, in the very first few layers, am remelting everything into the wax into a liquid form. As I add future layers and begin to build the painting, I don't have to fuse the wax as to a liquid state like it is in the first few layers. I can fuse it into what's called a glisten or a shine, and that just means giving it a very light application of heat until the wax gets just slightly shiny or comes to what we call a glisten, and that is fusing that top layer with the previous layers underneath. And after adding this first layer, I can still see areas of the board underneath the wax. I'm going to need to add several layers of a base coat before I begin actually painting. And before I begin adding each layer of encaustic wax, I let the previous layer solidify again. So when I fuse this flat this next time again, I'm again going to liquefy the entire piece to get it nice and flat surface. And then I'm going to wait a few minutes for it to solidify before I again go ahead and add another base coat. Another question I get asked a lot is whether I use the heat gun or the torch the most often? And the answer is I really use them interchangeably and have them constantly on my workstation in the studio. So right now for this second layer, I will use my Wagner heat gun to fuse this layer. And also with the torch or the heat gun, you can see that my hand is constantly moving. The wax can burn, and also if you hold it in one place too long, the wax will begin to separate on your board and it'll expose your board underneath. So you want to keep your hand constantly moving no matter what heat tool you're using to fuse your encaustic surface. And this is often the key to fusing, is just practicing constantly moving your arm around in different areas and heating the areas of your surface, of your encaustic surface. And it just takes a lot of practice and a lot of getting used to your heat tool and getting used to how the wax is going to move. I'm going to go ahead and add one more layer of white encaustic paint to this piece. And as I can touch and feel it, it's very, very warm. So if your piece is getting too hot, you might want to work on several pieces at a time and set this one aside for just a little while and let it really set up and solidify before you go ahead and add another layer. If your brush drags back through a layer that's too soft, it'll dig up the wax layers that you've already added previously. Okay, so I've added 4 layers of encaustic paint, encaustic medium to this piece, and I usually add at least 4 to 6 layers of base coat before I go ahead and begin my painting. And also this is I work on a tile surface. This is a large floor tile from the hardware store, from just the regular hardware store. This is an 18 by 18 floor tile, and I will stack these. If I'm working on a larger cradle board, then I'll go ahead and stack these side by side together, and that is going to absorb all the heat that I'm using with either the heat gun or the torch, so that I'm not burning my work surface or my table underneath. Fusing can be a little time consuming, so a lot of times I'll have a prep day and fuse several boards at once. It's also good practice to if you're working on practicing to get that really flat surface when you're fusing, have a prep day and do several boards at one time and just practice fusing everything flat and keeping your arm moving and that heat constantly rotating around your encaustic surface. And I've also added painter's tape to the side of my board, and that way any drips will come right off when I peel the tape off once my painting is done, and I don't have to worry about cleaning up the sides. So this encaustic surface is now prepped and ready to go and ready for me to begin painting. So I hope you really enjoyed these tips on fusing and getting started with your encaustic painting. Happy Wax on Wednesdays.